This is the third video about my latest project, a scissor lift workbench which I've adapted so I can use it with a blunt saw and a sliding miter saw. I made extendable tables for both saws, and thanks to the scissor lift workbench, I can also hang up the miter saw on my workshop wall. Today I'll show you how to use and build the aluminum fences and track stops for this project. These fences and stops will allow me to make more accurate cuts with a blunt saw, and also with the miter saw. I used a T-slot aluminum profile. As it has a slot in each of its 4 surfaces, it will allow me to use the track stops secured to the work table and insert the steel pipes required to make the extendable fences. To fasten the fences to the tables, I used a hammerhead nut and a piece of wood that will prevent it from moving when placing workpieces against the profile. I used 2 headless bolts to fasten the steel pipes to the small piece of the profile that's extendable. On the other end, I installed a tightening knob to lock the extendable part. I also used a steel ball from an old bearing to avoid damaging the profile whenever I tightened the knob. These are the stops I made out of wood. They're simple but fairly accurate if made with a little care. I made some wooden guides that are introduced in the slot of the aluminum fence. To lock them, I used a T-nut and a tightening knob. These stops can be used on both sides of the saw. I've greased all the mobile parts and the washer. You can see it turns when activating the stop, which is perfect to avoid wearing down the wood. Next to them, you can see another plastic stop I modified to use with this design. The plastic stops I modified also work correctly, but they're not as precise as the wooden ones. I cut off the part that acts as a guide to put it in the center and use them with this profile. Some of the stops you'll find in stores are made of aluminum. Be careful with that, as they might be more difficult to modify. The people at Rui sent me some other T-slot aluminum profiles, which will also be perfect to use as fences. It will only be necessary to remove the non-slip piece that they come with. Their aluminum wall is also a little thicker than that of the black profile I used, so they're even better. In these shots, you can see that they're also very versatile, as an addition to the workbench. If you're interested in getting more information about these profiles, or the scissor lift workbench used in this project, I'll leave a link to their website in the description of this video. Another interesting use for this T-slot aluminum profile is to use it as a fence for the sliding carriage of my mobile workbench. You'll only have to use these 2 brackets to fasten it to the carriage. If you're interested in a new video about this modification, let me know in the comments. Now I'll show you how I built these stops. I'll start by modifying the plastic stops I bought. The first step is to disassemble them and cut the piece of plastic that acts as a guide. With a bit of the same diameter as the aluminum profile slot, I cut a recess with the router table. I drill a hole to lock the stop with a piece flipped over. This way the channel will help me center this hole. I cut the aluminum that I'll use as a new guide. Ideally, the aluminum should fit in tightly enough in the channel so that we don't need to glue it up. I'm going to cut the piece that acts as a flip stop at the correct height. The rotation axis has quite a lot of play. I'll try to reduce it by sticking a bit of insulating tape to the bolt. All that's left now is to put all parts together and see if it all works correctly. Now I'll make my own track stops. After cutting a strip of wood and another of plywood with the required measurements, the next step is to cut the channel so that we can insert the wooden guide I already made. I fine-tuned this guide with sandpaper so that it fits tightly into the slot of the aluminum profile. I cut all the pieces to the required length and drill a hole to lock the stops. Even though I forgot this time, it's best to also drill these holes with a piece upside down. I sand down all the surfaces and cut a bezel on all the edges with a router table. I'm going to drill the hole that will act as rotation axis with a column drill. It's important to ensure this hole is square. It's time to glue on the piece of wood that will act as a guide with cyanoacrylate. I'll use sandpaper to flatten the surfaces and achieve a better finish on the wood. I'm going to use the T-nut as a guide to cut the leftover wood. It seems everything's working correctly, so the next step is to make the stops. I'll use the printable template included in the plans to make this step easier. After cutting and sanding all their surfaces, I apply some wax on them. I'm also going to use grease to lubricate all the moving parts. The last step is to insert the bolt that will act as a rotation axis. It's best to use a partially threaded bolt. It's time to make the fence rail extensions. After running some comparisons, I've noticed the steel pipe with a 1mm wall tends to bend a little less than the aluminum rod I used in the plans. Both materials are valid, but I don't have enough aluminum rod, so I'll use the steel pipe instead. I'll need some pieces of aluminum rod to put on the ends of the steel pipe so that I can thread them. I'll glue them on with epoxy. Now I'm going to drill the holes with a bit whose diameter is 0.5mm less than that of the bolts. It's important that all the holes are aligned. First, I'll use a 3mm bit to make the process easier. I thread them, and with a file and a deburring countersink, I remove the bits of metal. I've already placed one of the steel pipes that acts as an extension to the fence rail. Now I'm going to place the one I just drilled. I've noticed that when tightening the headless bolts, the aluminum profile becomes warped. To solve this, I'm going to drill a little hole for the headless bolt. This way we will barely have to tighten the bolt, and the profile won't get warped. I'm going to insert the steel ball to avoid damaging the profile when locking the extension. I've also noticed there's too big a gap between the steel pipe and the slot in the aluminum profile. I've thought about reducing it by adding some bits of insulating tape, and it seems to have worked. That's all for today. Thank you for watching this video until the end.